What the fuck, man? What is this about?
What the fuck is this? Webkins?
It's a pastime. What is this about? Explain.
For your undercard.
What?
At the Logan Paul KSI rematch.
What the fuck are you talking about?
You gotta train for your undercard.
Is that what these are for?
Yes.
So what exactly do you want me to do for this?
You gotta do a training montage, dumbass.
That is the most retarded thing I've ever heard.
So was the last fight. What's your point?
Fair enough. Are you sure this is a good idea?
Yeah, you gotta be able to take punches, don't you?
Yeah, I guess.
You ready?
Yeah, just let me count down. 3, 2, 1. Hi again, everyone. I hope you're all looking forward to seeing me fight in the Logan Paul vs. KSI rematch undercard in an undisclosed/undecided American venue. Though I would like to specifically call out Kappa Kaiju, FPS Diesel, Blues Dank, or James Marriott to a boxing match. Whoever is willing to battle a literal floating hoodie, let me know. I'll probably pussy it anyway, so you might as well. But jokes aside, I'm sure all of you, or at least a lot of you, saw the KSI vs. Logan Paul, Jake Paul vs. Deji fight yesterday. And for those of you who haven't, I can imagine that you heard about the outcome through Twitter moments or because people were going off about it on Twitter. But the main event, KSI vs. Logan Paul, ended in a majority draw, where KSI still left the fight as the champion, which led many people to believe the fight outcome to be fake, including myself at first, with a tweet that read like this: "As much as the fight felt real and the draw seemed like it fit the situation, this seemed so ducking faked, and Logan Paul called it the storyline. God fucking damn it." Kept it PG with that ducking bit, always playing that smart, please don't demonetize me YouTube game, except for when I say fact. Now, while these were definitely my thoughts at the time, I must admit that my opinion on the fight being fake has most definitely changed, if you couldn't tell from the title. And let me just reiterate that this is my opinion. If you disagree with it, that's totally fine, and I completely understand why you would think the fight was fake. I was in that same boat at first. Now, before I go over why I personally think the fight was authentic, let me go over my reasoning at the time, and a lot of the reasoning I've been seeing recently as to why the fight is fake. When I was watching the fight, the reason I thought it was probably rigged to an extent was because I thought that KSI should have had the decision to win the fight pretty in the bag. I thought he owned the majority of the fight and that he should have won, so it wasn't that I thought the fight itself was fake, but rather that the scoring was changed to a degree in order to create hype for a rematch, but obviously my thoughts on that have changed. Now, a lot of what I've been seeing on Twitter is that the post-fight interviews regarding specifically the KSI vs. Logan Paul match felt scripted, and while I understand this, as I personally took note of Logan calling the whole thing a storyline, I think at the time I was definitely reading too much into it, and obviously there was the idea that this was absolutely in both parties' best interest to try and get a draw out of it to justify a rematch even more so that they could make more money. They have every reason to try and stretch this kind of thing out, like a 10-minute video for ad revenue, but I'll address that in a bit. Now, having had time to rewatch the fight and talk with a few other people who are far more experienced with boxing and fighting in general than me, I feel safe in saying that the fight was legitimately a draw at the end of the day. So first off, in regards to the rematch stuff, yes, they absolutely had it in their best interest to make a rematch happen, but they both already said that they would take a rematch from the other if they won or not either way. And there were plans for a rematch since well before the fight actually happened. Like, in a leaked contract, I believe KSI stood to lose 50% of the ticket sales in Manchester Arena if there was no rematch in America, whereas if there was one, he got to keep 100% of the ticket sales. In addition though, to hype up a rematch more, things would have been a lot more sus to me if both of the two headline events had ended in a draw. But you could argue that they had Jake win the first one to try and balance it out where both families left with one champion or something. But to me, a lot of the reactions from the parties surrounding the two fighters is what kind of convinced me afterwards. You had True Jordy saying that people from both camps seemed a bit upset over something and that he wasn't sure what they had been told, but I'm sure we could kind of imagine what they have been told by now. Also, there was an Instagram story from Toby, one of the sidemen, saying that he thought KSI should have won at first like I did, but after rewatching it, a draw made sense. Things would, again, have been more suspect to me if it was a complete draw and not just a majority draw. Like, there was one judge who had the match won in favor of KSI, 58-57, where the other two judges scored it 57-57. Now, into the big meat of the fight being real. The fight itself. Where I originally thought KSI should have had the fight in the bag, after rewatching watching it, I do think that was my bias playing in. I mentioned earlier that after talking with someone who knows a lot more about boxing and fighting and whatnot than me, I was pretty convinced that the fight was legitimately a draw. Now, this is what personally changed my opinion. I'm not saying it will change yours, but the person is asked to remain anonymous, so it's up to you if you want to take this with a grain of salt or not, but here's what he said in regards to the Logan Paul versus KSI fight. Logan dominated the first 2 rounds with superior boxing skill, speed, and power. While he stood tall and used his leverage well, he had the same flaw as his brother Jake, leaving his left hand low. In the 3rd round, KSI started to exploit Logan's lack of left-handed defense with wild overhand rights that started to connect. KSI won the 3rd round. Starting with the 4th round, Logan started showing signs of heavy arms, but he continued to press the fight to KSI. He connected regularly, but his punches were slowing and his power diminished. While weak, he still won the round. KSI weathered the early storm by Logan and clearly had the better stamina. Not sure whether it was the early blast of aggression or lack of aerobic training, but for a former wrestler, Logan's stamina was poor to say the least. As Logan's exhaustion grew through rounds 5 and 6, KSI dominates. However, with the dominance of Logan in the first 2 rounds, and in my opinion, him winning the 4th round, I couldn't see the fight being anything other than a draw. Some other things that he noted for me was the way the fighters were truly getting winded, and the fists that were being thrown were genuine punches. You can't really fake that easily at all in boxing, and I would assume especially not on the level of boxing that KSI and Logan are on. And if the fight itself is authentic, being able to ensure a draw out of that becomes a lot harder. Like, what if the ref decides it's a TKO or a KO happens in the middle? The risk becomes even greater. Alright boys, listen, I want a clean fight, no hitting. One of the things that stuck out to me from that though was that Logan and Jake had the same flaw of keeping their left hand low, and since they both had the same trainer, or at the very least they trained together a lot, this made me think that this was a genuine thing they both had that both of their opponents exploited to a degree. But after all that, the fight, I even said in my original tweet, felt genuine to me from the jump, and having had time to mull it over, a draw seems like the most reasonable outcome in my head. Rounds 1, 2, and 4 went to Logan, and 3, 5, and 6 went to KSI. Now that that's out of the way, I want to talk about the true heroes of last night's fight, starting with Deji, who made Jake Paul's nose spurt a little bit of jelly. And thanks to him, we now have this amazing image of Jake looking like he's just eaten out his girl's pussy and forgotten she was on her period. Great stuff, Deji. I am so proud of you. But unironically, I totally underestimated him going into this fight. He took it to round 5 out of 6, and his team were the ones that called it in. And that was even after Jake had constantly said, oh, first round knockout, first round knockout. After the fight, he apologized for letting people down, but dude, you proved every single one of us wrong. You went in there and tore shit up the best you could. Mad props, man. Seriously, a lot of respect for you. And now on to my father, John Scarce, who may have lost the fight to Raka, but man lost 100 pounds for this fight and still got in the ring to box with someone who's been in shape for much longer and took a bajillion fucking hits to the face and stood tall and kept going. Oh, and did I mention he had a metacarpal fracture 9 days before the fight and still got in the ring when he could barely punch? Scarce lost, Raka won fair and square, so props to Raka for that regardless. But Scarce has made a massive fucking change in his life, and if you couldn't tell from my constant praise for him on Twitter, I fucking love Scarce, dude. I can't even lie. He's such a fucking G. Props to Faye Sensei and Overt Flow for going in for boxing. I'm personally hoping that at the rematch they get to go into the octagon and do full MMA so that they can let their full range really out. That would be exciting to me personally. I want to quickly mention, but not explicitly give a shout out to the dude who was doing Fortnite emote dances leading up to and through his whole boxing match and still fucking won. I think Momo was his name or something. I'll be honest, I don't really remember. And lastly, shout out to Robynche. Not for being in a fight, but for making an absolutely hilarious video the day before the event where he announced his fight with RiceGum. Where instead of actually announcing the fight, he got mad at RiceGum for denying his challenge to fight and for calling him irrelevant, and where he paid Liliana with a bag of quavers to break RiceGum's shins during the Sidemen charity football match. Good on you, Will. Now that those are all out of the way, the main event of KSI versus Logan Paul actually got compared to a couple different fights from other matches in pop culture media. People were drawing parallels left and right to help explain the fight to their grandparents who don't know what an internet modem is. The first one I saw was people comparing this fight to the one episode of iCarly where Carly challenges an MMA fighter to a match as a funny gag, and then actually ends up fighting her in the octagon in what is supposed to be a mock fight, but ends up becoming real when that slimy bastard Neville convinces the fighter that Carly pushed her grandmother over with malicious intent. I personally must say that this is one of those many examples you might see of life imitating art, which brings up the age-old question. How does Victoria Justice play Shelby Marks in this episode, and then also her character in Victorious in the crossover episode with iCarly? Those two characters existing in the same universe should lead to Victoria Justice being told she looks like Shelby Marks a lot more, and it just does not make sense in continuity unless some kind of supernatural element is at play play here. And if that is the case, then it could connect the Nickelodeon cinematic universe with the Disney Channel cinematic universe. Another fight that I've seen this Logan Paul versus KSI bout compared to quite often is one that you saw in an episode of SpongeBob, where SpongeBob and Patrick are competing against each other at the Fry Cook Games. And in the last event, they have to beat the fuck out of each other. And then at the end of the day, they hug it out and they leave the arena as friends. RiceGum posted a meme of this that I'm sure he nabbed from somewhere else, but regardless, I'm sure illustrated the thoughts of many viewers of the fight pretty well. But all of that aside, I just want to say respect to all the fighters that went out yesterday. They all clearly put in work to make yesterday's event possible, and even if it was fake, I was invested and I had a lot of fun. I can honestly say I thought it was worth paying for it, and that I probably would have regretted it if I didn't watch it. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like, and if you're new, subscribe. If you guys disagree with me or have any of your own thoughts on this whole thing, be sure to leave those in the comments below. I have a podcast with Wild Spartans and FPS Diesel called Loudmouse. We upload 2 new episodes every week on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and we're up on iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Kwite and on Instagram at Kwite.png. Links to both of those in the description below. And lastly, I also have a Discord server. Link to that in the description as well if you're interested. Anyways, this has been Kwite, and I will see you guys next time.